We're looking for ways to be that ice cream truck in the world, to deliver a little bit of happiness everywhere we go, lighten the load and brighten the day of a few people, specifically 100 people. It's the 100 Happy People Challenge, 40 days in which you set out to go the extra mile. And many of you are doing this, receiving lots of fun emails and hearing wonderful conversations. An email came saying, I visited shut-ins from our church today. Hope they feel the love of Christ. Another one said, my mother-in-law hasn't been able to go to church. She doesn't have transportation. We got up extra early to take her to worship. This is some typical responses. But then we got this one, and this was fun. This came in the general church email list, not from one of our members. It says, I was having trouble transporting some things on my car roof carrier. I pulled over to rearrange it, praying, Lord, please help me. Immediately, a man stopped and offered to help. He introduced himself and told me his pastor had challenged him to make 100 people happy. He loaded my things in his pickup and he followed me home, helped me unload. God answered my prayer by sending along someone from your church. Thank you. Well, whoever that is, you get 5 points. So the idea is this: set out to create 100 extra mile moments over a 40-day period. It's just an exercise to develop our sensitivity and our unselfish muscles. We try to do something that we typically wouldn't do, just go a little above and beyond in the way we treat people. I encourage you to keep up with this and share it with your groups, your Bible study groups, your home neighborhood groups, your family, great dinner table conversation. Share it on social media at #100HappyPeople and email me at 100HappyPeople@oakhillschurch.com. We'd love to read these and share a few of them. We're looking for some even blog opportunities we'll be sharing your way. Keep a journal of all this, and it'll really be a treasure to you. And at the end of those 40 days, you can look back. We began, I think we're on day 18 now or day 19, but you can start whenever you want to and do this. In our quest to make 100 people happy, we're studying some verses out of the Bible that we could call the one another verses. They're verses that have that phrase, one another, in them. Encourage one another, admonish one another, build up one another. Practical passages from the Bible that teach us how to just be a better person. Well, today's passage, I'll warn you, it's a little challenging. It's in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Oh, we could stop right there, couldn't we? Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So, Lord, would you help us unpack this passage, and would you forgive the sins of the one who speaks, for there are many, and help us to see Christ, just Jesus. Through Christ we pray. And all the church said. It was a big day in the Lucado house when we purchased a piano. My wife, Deanlin, loves to play the piano, and she wanted to pass the passion on to the girls. We have 3 daughters. They were very small at the time, ages 4 and 2, and Sarah was still a newborn. So when it came to playing the piano, it was more pounding the piano than playing the piano. But still, it was enough for them to want to have a nightly piano recital. Maybe it was just a ploy to postpone bedtime. But either way, what dad can resist that invitation? Daddy, can I play you a song? And so into the living room we would go, and they would get up. And I have this memory really in my mind that repeats itself many times of a little girl wearing her pajamas, those footed pajamas, you know, her hair's still wet from the bath, and she gets up and she plays something, and then she jumps down and she curtsies, and mom and dad applaud, and then up comes daughter number 2. It was really a delight most nights. But some nights there were fights. Now, I know your kids didn't fight or don't fight, but sometimes Jenna, according to Andrea, would play too long. Or sometimes Andrea, according to Jenna, would not do right on the song. And so there was often this collision on the piano bench, one would jump up next to the other and start scooting her off, or saying, no, do it this way. And so I would have to referee, and they would say, well, but Daddy, she's taking too long, or she's not playing it right. And what they didn't know is that I wasn't grading them. I wasn't keeping score. It wasn't a contest. It was just, let's all enjoy one another. Competition and comparison was turning those little girls into tyrants. It always does. Jesus once had an issue like this with two sisters. And it's a fascinating story that is really challenging, and it has to do with competition and comparison. And it reads like this. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about, and Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Have you already read this story? Most of the time when we talk about Mary and Martha, we talk about it from the vantage point of two distinct personalities. One, a very tranquil or contemplative, reflective person, Mary, and the other, Martha, a very productive, kind of high energy, maybe a little type A personality. And I think that's fair. But I think there's something else in here that would help us to understand the passage. And that is the problem that Martha dealt with was not so much her list of things to do, but the attitude with which she was doing it. And that begins to shine through as we study the story deeply. Do you like to fill in blanks? This lesson has some blanks that you want to fill in on your outline. We begin Luke 10:38 reading, Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. This is, if you want to fill in the blank, Martha's moment. This is Martha's big moment. It's interesting, don't you think, that Luke says Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. Not Martha and Mary welcomed Jesus. Not Martha and Mary and their brother Lazarus, who all lived under the same roof. But Martha took charge. Martha stood at the doorway. Martha welcomed Jesus and the disciples into their home? No, her home. Her kitchen, her house, her domain, her territory. Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. This was her big moment. And she had a special event planned for Jesus and the disciples. She had in mind, Luke says, a big dinner. This wasn't just hors d'oeuvres or peanut butter sandwiches. She had in mind a big dinner. So she escorted Jesus into the living room, had him sit down, had the disciples sit down, and she was just about to sit down and enjoy a conversation with them when ding, 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 she heard something in the kitchen. And so she stood up and she said, please excuse me, I'd love to stay and chat, but of course someone has to cook. And so she went in and realized the timer was going off, and it was time to check out her soup. Her carrot ginger soup. She had learned the recipe for carrot ginger soup by watching her namesake on television, Martha Stewart. Martha of Bethany loved Martha of Stewart. And Martha of Stewart had this special recipe for carrot ginger soup. And in the TV show that Martha of Bethany had watched more than once, Martha of Stewart warned the viewers, be sure, don't let the soup get too cold or get too hot. And so she had set the timer because this was a big dinner. This was Martha's moment. And so Martha went in and she checked the soup. She pulled it off of the stove. She set it on the counter. She took a wooden spoon and she took a sip and she nearly gagged. She realized she had forgotten to put the ginger in the ginger carrot soup. Martha of Stewart had warned her that this could happen, but she had forgotten. Oh my goodness, it tasted as bland as egg whites. Now what was she going to do? She said loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, "I got to remake the soup. It doesn't taste good." No response from the other room. So she walked over and she opened those wooden shutters that separate the kitchen from the living room and the dining area. And she looked in and said, "I got to remake the soup." Jesus gave her a thumbs up, says, "Okay. We could be a little late on dinner." Jesus gave her a thumbs up, said, "We're all right." It never occurred to Martha to just skip the soup. It didn't, because the soup was a part of a plan. This was a big dinner. This was Martha's moment. And the soup was an important part of Martha's moment. She had envisioned the moment in which Jesus would taste Martha of Bethany's soup that she got from Martha of Stewart. And that Jesus would taste the soup, and all the disciples would pause. Yea, verily, all the angels would pause. And all the neighbors by then would have gathered out in the front lawn, because they would have gotten word Jesus is about to taste Martha's soup. And Jesus would taste Martha's soup, and he would say, "Oh, this is heavenly. This is divine. This is the broth of angels." It's all right there in the Bible. I don't know if you read it or not. And so it was important. The soup was all a part of the big moment, the big dinner. So she set about the task of remaking the soup. She got the soup going again, got the stove relit, and thought to herself, well, as long as I'm in here, I'll check the meatloaf. It had to be basted, it had to have the tomato sauce. And then she would put a little glaze of honey on it. And it was time to get the honey out. And when she reached up, she got the honey out of the pantry. That's when she saw on the kitchen table that tray with a pitcher of tea and the glasses full of ice but no tea. Oh, she forgot to serve the mint tea. What kind of hostess was she? So she grabbed it and she walked in and she gave it to Jesus. Said, "Jesus, I'm so sorry I forgot to serve you tea. What kind of hostess am I?" That's when she noticed nobody had noticed. Nobody had missed the tea. Nobody was missing her. Peter and James and John, all those guys were just sitting around talking and chuckling. And right there in the middle of them, who? Mary, her sister, was doing nothing, while Martha was doing everything. She turned and walked right back into the kitchen and she checked the meatloaf. It was getting hot, and so was she. She could feel her neck starting to... Veins were starting to bulge. And she started chopping vegetables. And boy, that knife was coming down hard and hard, hard, hard. Why can't somebody help me? Why am I in here doing it all? Why? I mean, it was not what she wanted. And Martha's moment quickly became, if you want to fill in the blank, Martha's resentment. She resented her sister. She resented the fact that she, Martha, was doing all the work and Mary was in there just listening. Luke 10:39, Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. Does she not know there's work to be done? Does she not know I'm in here doing all of this by myself? And so Martha set about trying to get Mary's attention. As she clanged some silverware together. She let some pots clang together. She dropped some cans onto the floor. She let out one of those big foghorn sighs. Oh. And finally, it was all she could handle. I mean, that frustration just bubbled up inside her, and Martha's moment became Martha's meltdown. With wooden spoon still in hand, she marched back into the living room, and she slapped that palm in her hand, and don't you know, every male disciple sat up straight. And she said to Jesus, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. No disciple spoke. Mary didn't speak. She looked down, but Jesus looked up. And he looked at Martha. What happened to Martha? What do you think? What happened? What happened to that Martha who just moments ago was welcoming everybody into the house? What transpired? What changed her? Well, Luke says Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. See, she had big plans to make a big impression with her big event. Instead, she ended up making a big mess. And she became worried and upset over all of these details. Don't you think it's ironic that there she was in the Prince of Peace, in the presence of the Prince of Peace, and yet she was a picture of stress? What was Martha's mistake? Let's see if we can figure out, what did Martha do that caused her to respond this way? What was Martha's mistake? Is the point of this story to teach us that it is a sin to cook? That it is a sin to be hospitable? I don't think so. I don't think the point of the story is to teach us it's a sin to be responsible or organized or even ambitious. Martha's mistake, I would go so far as to say, was not her request. It would have been right for Mary to come in and help out. There was something in Martha's attitude, something in Martha's tone, something in her perspective that caused her to spiral downward. Maybe the word that best fits is the word self-promotion. This was her party. But she had gone from serving Jesus to promoting self. Instead of making a big deal out of Christ, she was making a big deal out of her dinner, out of her offering. And the focus had gone from honoring him to promoting self. Self-promotion is all about self. Look what I can do. Look what I have done. Self-promotion does not have much latitude for people who are different than they are. They need to do more. They need to help me. They need to get up and come in. Martha's attitude was such that her sense was that she was being unfairly treated. Interesting, don't you think, that her attitude so soured her that she actually got bossy with Jesus. Tell her to come and help me. Can our service intended for Jesus so sour us that we begin to tell Jesus what to do and begin to tell other disciples how to respond? So it's not a real pretty sight, is it? Of the two sisters at this moment, which of the two would you want to hang out with? This self-service, this self-promotion, it creates a sour Christian, a sour servant. I wonder if we have any Marthas among us. No, I wonder if most of us have a little bit of Martha within us. And that the purpose of this story and others is to warn us to be careful and not to slide in our intent to serve Jesus into a posture in which we're really serving and promoting ourselves. This is a slippery slope, this spiritual ambition. The branch of service so tightly intertwines with the poison ivy of self-service that sometimes it's hard to tell where one starts and the other stops. Maybe that's why the apostle was so insistent in this verse. He said, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." Vain ambition. It creeps in on the cat's feet of Christian service and turns gifted Marthas into miserable mumblers. Have you ever sensed the spirit of a Martha within you? Boy, I have. In fact, I'm about to tell you a story that may cause you to file a petition to have me fired. Some time ago, it's been a couple of years, I received an invitation from a group, a Christian conference that was taking place here in our city. At the 11th hour, their speaker had canceled. And they needed somebody to come and fill in for this speaker. Required no travel, required only clearing a calendar, great opportunity, wonderful strategic group of folks. Would I be willing to come and fill in for their guest speaker? My first thought, I'll confess, was fill in? I wasn't your first pick. I'm your substitute. Don't you know who I am? I don't just go around filling in for people. And this kind of ugly, tacky, self-centered attitude just took over. I declined the invitation. That's nauseating, isn't it? Self-service always is. And when self-service takes over, Jesus is not served. But Marthas get bossy and Maxes get puffy. And nothing good happens. Hence the apostle, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is very direct here. Again, Philippians 2:3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. Nothing. We got to be on the watch. We got to check our motives. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. Paul's antidote is, in humility, value others better than yourselves. Make it your aim to every time you see another person who walks with Christ to determine they're more important to the kingdom than I am. I'm not God's MVP. You're not God's VIP. We're treasured. We're loved. We're bought by God. We're indwelt by His Spirit. But none of us is indispensable. Not one of us. God doesn't have to have your service to do His work, and He doesn't have to have mine to do His work. In fact, Jesus said, if you don't speak, the rocks will cry out. He's got a lot of alternatives. And there was a story in the Old Testament when the prophet was hesitant, and so the donkey preached. A lot of people, after they hear me, think he's still doing that today. Romans 12:3 says, have a sane estimate of yourself. Have a sane estimate. And the word sane there is sometimes translated sober. Sober. In other words, don't get drunk on your own importance. Don't get inebriated as to your own importance. Have a sane, a realistic understanding of your place in the kingdom. You have gifts. Mary has gifts. Peter has gifts. We have skills and abilities. And God can use any of us, but he doesn't have to have any of us. I think this is a helpful exercise to apply this teaching, especially during this time of 40 days in which we're trying to make people happy. Take time to make a list of all the people who've made a difference in your life. Just make a list. It's a delightful assignment. Make a list of every teacher, relative, coach, preacher, friend, neighbor, who has made a difference. And just write a sentence out and say, because of so-and-so, I learned this. Because of so-and-so, I'm better at this. And you will soon back up and say, whoa, there's a lot of people who helped me be who I am. I am who I am because other people cared. And none of us are in this all alone. And all of us need all of us. And then once you have the list, go to the second verse with it and let those people know. Send them an email, write them a letter, give them a call. Boy, you talk about making somebody happy. Thank them, and thank God that he has all types of people to do all types of work. And that whenever that spirit of a Martha comes up in which we insist that things be done our way, or we think it's our big moment, may his spirit remind us that sometimes it's right to be a Mary, to slow down and just sit at the feet of Christ and listen to what he has to say. So you play your piano music, and I'll play my piano music. And let's see if we can't play together. And when we do, I have a feeling we're going to enjoy the evening a lot more. Do you agree? Okay, Lord, so thank you for this really interesting story that you give us. It's such a peek into the human nature, the human heart. Father, I pray that we've treated it well, and if we haven't, would you forgive us and then reveal to us really what you want us to learn? And would you help us, Lord, to be humble servants, grateful yet humble servants in your kingdom. And forgive us for when we do self-promote, because, Lord, your glory, well, it's yours and yours alone.